Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coach's Corner. I am Jeffrey David Hartford, your host and the coach. That's the conduit of optimism, altruism, consciousness, and health. And today I'm really blessed to have the opportunity to have a conversation with gastroenterologist, scientist, speaker, author, CEO of Microbiome, and microbiome expert, Dr. Sabine Hazan. Dr. Sabine, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's awesome. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely my pleasure for sure. So I've been following you for quite some time now. And as I mentioned, you're an author. And of course, I have with me here the book. Yep.
Perfect.
Audience, that's right. Book is Let's Talk Shit. We have with us an absolute literal expert at talking shit. And, I've been doing my fair share of that over the years from being a child and doing it in a silly way. And now, learning more about the microbiome and about what it means, of what bacteria is present, what is not. I'm very curious in hearing more from you. As I said, I've been following for a little bit now, so I've seen a little bit of an arc going on, and certainly some of the more recent stuff. And boy, this past 5 years has been a bit chaotic, right?
Chaotic, to say the least.
Exactly. But I will say, I'll start here, and then we'll kind of get your backstory. I've heard you say that you've taken an approach of faith over fear, and that resonated so deep with me. You really seem to have this sense of you've got a curiosity and you've got a genuine interest in finding the answers, not just confirming what the narrative is supposed to be. So, with that, what got you into being a doctor? Why gastroenterology? And what's the backstory on?
Well, I think, the backstory of why I became a doctor was really to understand life. Where do we go after we die? And really, going into medical school wasn't really helping me. Asking patients when they died and came back, it wasn't really helping me. And so I went into the research because it was just cutting edge, right? And I thought, well, there might be answers there with research. When a bacteria called C. diff, I was the top enroller for pharmaceutical companies. And whenever the patients didn't work with the clinical trial, I would do a procedure called fecal transplant, which is essentially taking microbes from a healthy donor, taking stools from a healthy donor, putting it into into the colon of a patient that has C. diff. When that procedure showed more than fixing C. diff, like you look at the data of Colleen Kelly that showed, improvement of alopecia areata. You look at the data of Sahil Khanna that looked at improvement of chronic urinary tract infection post C. diff. You look at others, the work of so many GI doctors on the front line, Jessica Allegretti, Neil Stolman, etc. So when you see all that, you go, wait a minute, there's something in the microbiome, right? And when I looked at, when I saw like pharmaceutical companies were heading into clinical trials of poop pills, I said, well, we're in the poop business, but we have really no idea what we're seeing in the microbiome. So how about we start understanding better the microbiome before starting to push these poop pills, right? And I think what happened to me was really a discovery, really seeing that microbes that are in our guts really consume us, but also decompose our bodies when we go underground. And so, what happens to those microbes when we die, when they decompose the body, And so, when those questions that kind of brought me closer to understanding, that hey, this is the path I need to go in if I want to understand what my life's dream has been since I was 5 years old. I would ask God, where do we go after we die? Just
Yeah.
answer this question, right? And so it's kind of been interesting to kind of go in this path of really, first of all, reaffirming my belief in God. Because when you get into the microbiome and you see trillions of microbes working together, and Dr. Barodi, who's my partner and wrote the book, Let's Talk Shit with Me, and obviously Shelley Ellsworth, my author, when we wrote the book, that was one of the things we said, wow, how complex is the microbiome, right? How how incredible that all these microbes, if you lose one group of microbes, a person's not healthy, right?
Yeah.
If you lose the diversity, you've lost health, right? If you change your microbiome from like a person that's, you give it a microbiome that's a happy, microbiome, a happy person to a depressed person, that
Hmm.
person changes, right? So we've definitely seen that, case studies here and there in GI where we're like, wow, I changed the microbiome and the person's no longer suicidal. I changed the microbiome and the person's skin is much better. What did I do? So obviously, I don't think God wants us to like just play with poop, right?
Yeah.
But I think, he put the answers in there. And in a way, I kind of say, God has a sense of humor because to put answers of life in poop that nobody would
Mhm.
even touch, right? Only the brave ones are touching it. And that's what it was for me, right? It was, first of all, I was the girl in GI that Neil Stolman would tell you if there was poop in the colon, I'd be like, sorry, out of there, reprep, come back next week, because if there was poop, I was not playing with it. So for me to kind of take on this role of really analyzing stools of the elephants, analyzing stools of the giraffe, analyzing stools of zebras and lions, and really not have fear of like touching poop or collecting. Obviously, the first time I was like mortified. But you get to this point where you're so excited to know what you're gonna find that it's you don't look at poop anymore. You look at it as there's something else. This is going to tell me one more story, one more thing. Analyzing the lions told me why the lions are carnivore. Analyzing the elephant, why the elephant is herbivore. So seeing all that, opening a dong of an elephant, seeing, you know, hundreds of ticks flying, like in the dong, and then asking the question, why is the guy that's holding the dong not getting Lyme disease? And why is the woman that's hiking in Malibu getting Lyme disease, right? From a tick. So that was really, it's become like a passion. I travel now and I'm like obsessed about collecting stools. People will tell you I need them and I go, I need to collect, like I'll hear a story and I'll say, can I have your stools? So it's kind of weird, but this is what I do.
That's
I've become
brilliant.
a poop collector. I've gone from GI to the poop collector.
Yes, but you know what I love about that though, and this is why I think you're saying of the faith over fear, bless you. It really resonated with me because you have found your path. You are on purpose. You're in alignment with your purpose, and I have this sense that when we're in alignment with our purpose, whatever obstacle is in our way, as strange as it might be to somebody else, it just feels right for us. You found your calling, and that I really admire that, and your level of
So
humility too.
yeah, and also, well, first of all, there's a lot of humility that needs to that needs to
Yes.
come into this field, right? Because we
Yes.
don't know shit. I mean, let's be
Yep.
honest, right?
Amen.
And literally, we don't know shit. We don't know the microbiome, right? So, and it makes you relook at everything you've learned. It makes you go back and say, wait a minute. So E. coli, I thought was a bad bug, but it's a good bug in some people, right? Or Clostridium difficile. Here I tried to kill that bug for 30 years and only to realize, wait a minute, it's part of the normal microbiome. And it's really when you kill the families that it starts secreting its toxins to kill the host, right? So really it's humbling at best. I started with the idea of, hey, hydroxychloroquine is the answer, and actually, have a patent that's HAZD-PAC, HAZ for my last name, but also hydroxychloroquine is azithromycin, zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin D. HAZD-PAC was my formula at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Because I saw the work of Didier Raoul. I saw how he survived during the pandemic, and he was older. And I said to myself, well, there's got to be something to hydroxychloroquine, right? If he survived and all these patients of his survived. So I patented. I actually thought that was the answer, right? Until I saw what it did to the microbiome. And then I started taking on a different hat and saying, "Oh my God, I'm wrong. This is not the answer." To right. And then I took on ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc. and again did my research on ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc. We were the lab that showed ivermectin increased bifidobacteria within 20. However, what about long term, right? And when I saw that data, I said, well, you know what? That's not the answer for everybody. We need to be more precise into what patient are we dealing with, right? Obviously, in a perfect world, everybody would have a microbiome testing, and we would say, okay, you've got enough bifidobacteria, you don't need probiotics, you don't need anything, your gut's going to handle COVID, right? But we don't have a magnifying lens, and these stool tests are extremely expensive. So, we have to kind of like, in a way, practice the art of medicine. And that's what I did during the pandemic. And it really was faith over fear, because it was really like that ability to jump into the abyss, and knowing God's going to guide you out of the abyss. It's like, and it's funny because I've talked to priests and people of faith that believe in God, and they always say it's like putting yourself in a barrel and then having the barrel, get thrown into the Niagara Falls, and knowing that that barrel's going to survive with you in it because you have faith, because you know that's the right thing to do. I'm not saying go jump in a barrel, off Niagara Falls, but I knew that saving lives was the right thing to do. I knew that God, and I think I learned that during, the Woolsey fire, when I helped my neighbors with the supplies. And my family was mortified because they're like, you're going into the fire, you're going to risk your life to what? To bring supplies, generators. The firemen are not even going there. Why are you going? And I would tell my parents, I would say, God's not going to kill me. And I remember bringing my daughter with me to bring one of the supplies on the third day after I felt comfortable, obviously. And she was scared at the beginning, but I wanted to give her confidence. And the one lesson that I taught her there was God's not going to kill you if you're going to help others. It's just, you have to try. You have to do what's right. And to me, COVID was exactly that. It was, I have to try. I can't let people just die and just go to the hospital. I have to try. And so I think that was the most important lesson for me of trusting God. And believe me, there were days that it was so much. It was so much. 52 patients, family struggles, pressures from, husband, family, the vaccine, the narrative, the politics, the not being able to go to restaurants, the not being able to go buy food and all that. It and I remember like going to God and saying, how much more, God, can you give to me? But really seeing the power of God, seeing how, and it's so funny, and it's kind of like, in a way, it's like, again, really humbling, because seeing the power of God, like, being on the same stage as Robert Kennedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
During the Woolsey fire, when we talked about the negligence of the management of the fires, being on the same stage as he was talking about autism, me being on the front line of autism, taking care of these kids, doing fecal transplant, trying to get a protocol approved by the FDA for fecal transplant, looking at the microbiome of kids with autism, speaking on that, being on that same stage. And then COVID hits, and we're both again on the same stage. It's like God picks his warriors. And it's amazing because the people that have come to me are really people of faith. It's real of deep faith, not the people that are like, well, we need to raise money for the church because we want to make money, right?
Yep.
We're
Yep.
talking about people that have such a high belief that no matter how sick they are, they still pray. They still believe that God will help them. It's that hope. It's that divine intervention that we're here to just learn a lesson, whatever that lesson is. Maybe we come back, and maybe we were the person that ignored a Parkinson's patient when, in another life, and then we become the Parkinson's patient, right? We don't know. We don't know. So the fact is, everything in life recirculates, right? You've got, water evaporates, comes back as rain, right? Microbes decompose the body, go back into the earth and recirculate, right? Everything recirculates. Why wouldn't souls recirculate? Why wouldn't, what we know to be true, this, we're just a body of reservoirs of microbes. So when when you remove the it's all about me, and you start looking at these trillions of microbes that make me who I am, that give me my hair, that give me my nails, that give me my thought process, my ability to focus when I need to focus, my ability to juggle 25 different hurricanes, as I like to call them. There's only God that creates. There's a creator behind everything. Some of the geniuses in the world, you think of Albert Einstein, he said there's no coincidences in life. Coincidence is God's way of being anonymous.
Hmm.
And it's true. And I felt that during the pandemic. I also felt losing no one during the pandemic was God's miracles. Having that intuition that the COVID was in the stools, that was God's miracles.
Yeah.
Having that intuition that you could take the microbiome of a sister and implant it in her brother and improving the quality of life for that autistic kid, that was intuition. That was God's miracle, right? Having that intuition that I'm going to use the microbiome of a wife to a husband that has Alzheimer's, that was intuition, and that was God's miracle showing me, hey, there's something in the microbiome of Alzheimer's. And now everybody's looking at that, right? Same thing with Parkinson's, same thing with pretty much everything. So it's a new era. It's almost biblical if you want to think about it. It's God reminding us that he's around. It's God showing his presence in science, the actual belief that there is a God first, and then science opens up, right? Because who else creates everybody to have different finger prints and different microbiome? And yet we're all different, but we're all beautiful, and we all add to the world, to the planet, right? Different races add so much beauty to the planet. And so, we've been divided, and I think it's time to come together. So I think that's
I
what
agree
God.
wholeheartedly. That's beautiful. And, as you're talking, there's a bunch of dots I'm connecting through COVID and because of all the restrictions. I live in New York, but I'm from New Hampshire originally. And my mom was sick, and I went to visit her in the hospital, and they would not let me in. And that was on a Saturday. And the next day, Sunday, she passed.
Oh,
And there was a part of me that was heartbroken by that, but there was a part of me that felt like that was God's plan and I wasn't supposed to be there. She knew I came to visit. I had the opportunity to see dad and my brothers that day, and we had a great day together. And I had the opportunity to share with my older brother that, should the time come, let her know she's got my blessing. If it's her time, she can go. And he did just that. And she passed with, as I like to say, emotionally speaking, no open wounds. Things were resolved and she was ready. But there is a part of me that, although I choose to view it that way, I know not everybody that was in a similar situation handled it that way. And I think similarly, I'm put in a position in a couple of different ways that, like you, I have faith. And I think this is my path. This past March, actually, we're coming up on a year now, my dad passed and he had Parkinson's. So you mentioned Parkinson's. And of course, I appreciate that. I talk about it very, very openly now. And I know as I do that, some people get a little uncomfortable around death. So I try to, show the level of respect of death in and of itself, and of course of my parents. But I think there's some value in being very open and transparent about it and what it means to me and the lessons that we can learn from it. As you talk about with as you now are beginning to call it, the refloralization, as opposed to this transplant, right? This fecal transplant.
right,
But
right.
that was on my radar with dad. And although it wasn't the Parkinson's that took him, I actually, that'll be something we can come to later. I have a sense that he wound up being a victim, if you will, of injury and so on. But that's a
Did
conversation
he
for
have
maybe a few minutes down the road.
Parkinson's after the vaccine, or did he have it before?
He was diagnosed with it well beforehand
I
for
got it.
several
Okay.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's been a lot of cases after the Parkinson's.
That
And they
doesn't surprise
present
me either.
differently, by the way, in their microbiome. It's interesting. It's a different signature microbiome.
With Parkinson's specifically, or,
Yeah,
pre
Parkinson's,
and post.
yeah, post and pre, different signature microbiome. So it's an interesting thing because when we've been fixing people that have been post injury, they actually do better than the people that have like like a predisposition that is
Yeah,
genetically inherited. Whether it's genetically inherited or whether it's microbiome inherited, it's still,
sure.
to me, it's still inherited.
Yeah, that is a fair point. I can appreciate that. And the other variable at play here, this whole faith over fear dynamic. I was diagnosed last June with a tumor on my left kidney, and I'll throw out there now, just so we can, again, transparency. I did not get the. I am curious, and maybe we can scratch the surface on this, about this idea of seeding. If somebody that was is around somebody that was not, there's this potential kind of cross contamination I've heard people talk
There's
about.
definitely plausible evidence
Hmm.
that there could be something about the whole shedding, that it's
Yeah,
airborne.
shedding. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, there's that, that it's airborne. The problem is, and what we're coming to realize is that these microbes were designed, right?
Hmm.
Dr. Adonis Farah, who works at the hospital, for the government, basically says, he calls them designer microbes, right? And that's what people don't realize is we have the technology now to cut a piece of a microbe and attach it to another microbe. So in essence, we create a super bug, right? Unfortunately, when we create those super bugs, then we create bigger problems because like the body's not used to these bugs that are joined together, right? So so is there, I mean, is one of the piece airborne and are you catching it? Yeah, I mean, listen, we were the lab that found COVID in the stools. And
Hmm.
we also were the lab that showed that two people that had the original Wuhan strain in their stools. So are you recreating the original Wuhan strain, and therefore, when you go to the bathroom, does it become airborne and then the next person gets contaminated? We've certainly seen during the pandemic, husband gets vaccinated, comes home, wife has been at home, never was out, and then a week later gets COVID. How did she get COVID? If not from the husband was probably shedding through his stools this virus that basically recombines somehow. We don't know too much about the messenger RNA technology. It's a loose cannon, in my opinion. I personally think it incorporates itself into other microbes and activates them. I think we've seen CMV encephalitis, we've seen herpes encephalitis. So I think what it does is it basically incorporates itself as probably acellular and therefore is able to penetrate a microbe in the gut. We have so many microbes and therefore activates it. We definitely have seen cases of, people that were and then got C. diff, people that were and got H. pylori, people that were got shingles, people that were got herpes encephalitis, CMV encephalitis, JCV. So is it that they housed those microbes to begin with, and then you give them the spike travels the blood, ends up in the small in the colon, and then activates a bacteria in the colon or virus? Maybe, who knows, but how do you prove that experiment and how do you do that? And to me, if you have these questions, that technology should not be out, especially if
Yes.
we're seeing, awakening of microbes in people post. But of course, when, you hide the data, you don't talk about the serious adverse event, how are you going to know anything?
Hmm.
So, I'm just a messenger in this whole thing. And to me, at the end of the day, freedom of choice.
Yeah.
Government wants to vaccinate themselves, go for it. Freedom of choice. Senators want to vaccinate themselves, freedom of choice. I'm all for freedom of choice.
Sure.
So, but, for freedom of choice also for those people that believe in their gut microbiome to support them,
That's right.
it's their right to say no. My body, my choice. Why is it my body, my choice with abortion and not my body, my choice with vaccination, right?
Hmm.
So, but then we get into the whole vaccination controversy, and then we're going to get shadow banned on social media because they don't want to.
Exactly.
It's a big business.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it
Because
is. There's too much money behind it, but it's interesting, as you said. It's as we in labs start creating things and playing God, we're causing so many problems. I like to think of myself as a health and wellness generalist. I've been in the industry for over 20 years and kind of pull from a lot of different areas. But my sense right now is the bulk of our ailments that we're running into are because we're getting further and further and further removed from nature. And if we get
Yeah.
back in touch with nature, get in sync with our circadian rhythm, pull in some of this quantum biology realm, and really let nature heal us, that seems to be the answer in so many ways. And the fact of the matter is, I believe. Go ahead.
No, and nature with maybe adding what's not natural, right? So maybe there's a way to bring both together, right? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be one or the other. Just because emails started happening and we had all these iPhones doesn't mean that the post office is going to stop working, right? People are still sending mail, people are still sending packages. So the post office is busy and the email is busy, I think we tend to think so narrow, so close minded in life that it's like one or the other. Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it be both? Why can't I do the chemo and optimize the gut and bring back nature to kill the tumor, but then optimize the gut to improve the microbiome and use natural products, right? Why can't it be both? So much of my practice in Malibu is utilizing both. I mean, I use the natural because a lot of my clients, celebrities hate pharmaceutical products, right? And so I've had to use the natural. But every so often, you have to use the pharmaceutical, right? I mean, ivermectin is still a pharmaceutical, yet in a way is natural because it's a fermented product of a bacteria. So, you know, I think that's what it's all about to me. It's really that joining, not one versus the other, and
Yeah,
not damaging one to gain power in the other. They can work together.
that's
I
right.
think we've been divided so much because division sells. PR 101, divide the world and you can sell crap because you make them
Mm-hmm.
fearful.
That's it.
But we're no longer going to divide. We can still sell. We can still. There's a huge business. As much as there's a huge business in the vaccines, there's a huge business in understanding the microbiome. Think about trillions of microbes, trillions of combinations. This is a whole new world. We need to embark on it. Stop with the old stuff and advance science to see what could be better. Maybe the answer is not to suppress the immunity or mimic the immunity or mimic the bacteria, but maybe enhance the good stuff
Yeah.
to suppress the bad stuff. Bring back the balance. That's what I want.
I love that. And it really, you mentioned before how much we need humility in medicine. And that's the answer. I mean, if everybody comes into it with this mindset, a lot of what you're saying makes me think about this narrative I've been thinking about lately. We're watching, I hope, the end of what I've been labeling the disempowerment paradigm. And we're now ushering in the empowerment paradigm. And I
Yeah,
truly believe that's what we're going to need to have happen, because in order to do what you're talking about, go back to the idea of my body, my choice. Do I want the, do I not? I need the information. I need to be able to give informed consent, yes or no. But there wasn't information and things were being actively censored. So that's all part of this disempowerment side of it. If we can empower, we give people more information, we help. In fact, I think this is really apropos because I've had a sense for years now that the root cause of the bulk of our problems right now is how sick we are and how the gut brain axis is just destroyed and so few of us can actually think clearly. This
yeah,
mind of
you're
ours,
100%. We're
right?
living in a zombie world. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's so funny because yesterday I had like this little Instagram space that I put out, and I said, Lord, give me patience for those that I perceive evil because they've lost microbes. And
Yes.
really, that's what it is, right? It's having patience with those. I'll give you an example. I had a patient who basically wanted fecal transplant. She didn't have C. diff, okay? And she was all upset because she wanted fecal transplant, but she doesn't have C. diff. There's only
Mm,
so much I can do, right?
yep.
She was screaming and all sorts of things, right? And I really literally had to say, give me patience. Because I know I've seen her microbiome. It's a disaster. She's missing microbes. Yes, she needs fecal transplant. but we're not there. And there's so many complications to her case, because people think, well, fecal transplant is the answer to all. No, there's some people that, the nerve is damaged.
Sure.
It's like that you're trying to make a light bulb, light up, but the cable to the light bulb is cut. How
Yep.
are you going to light up a light bulb without a cable to it, right? So there's an expectation that is, that people think like, oh my God, I can't believe, or, we're not there in the microbiome space right now, right? So a lot of patients come to me and they're like, oh my God, my doctor didn't even test a micro. Well, why would your doctor test a microbiome test? They're not even available to the consumer. And the ones that are available to the consumer are flawed. There's no clinical data behind it. So of course the National Institute of Standard is going to be cautious. Of
Yeah.
course, they're going to do due diligence before they can say, yes, this test is valid. Yes, this test. Even I, by the way, I didn't come out with a consumer product. My lab, it's strictly research. And I tell this to everybody because I say, look, I could be full of it or I could know it. I don't know. I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be fully transparent. So we give our patients like a 25-page consent that basically steps says everything. This is a stool test. That's a microbiome testing. We don't know the microbiome yet. We are at the beginning of it. This is, so, and you're entering a research. And as we discover, we keep you in the loop and we discover and we show you what we've seen so far in the microbiome space. But guess what? Tomorrow could be a better technology. Right now, we have the cutting edge technology in our lab. This is like a top of the line lab where we have like even robots that are like pipetting, So we're top of the line genetic sequencing lab. But tomorrow, a better machine could come out and say, hey, there's a new microbe, you know, go figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Or we could develop a different bioinformatics pipeline and find a different microbe that nobody knew, right? Dr. Feingold, who was the father of, who wrote the book on anaerobic infections, named a couple microbes after his kids. Alistopes Feingoldii. So every time I see his name, this bug, I think of him. So, we may start naming bugs that are going to be, crucial to something, maybe the
Sure.
Brazilian bug, right? That's something that needs to be, that's the future. But if we stop, if we censor, because we feel threatened that, our product is not going to sell, first of all, I personally think that even if they didn't censor the vaccine, they would have still had a better business than if they didn't censor the vaccine, right?
Agreed.
Because when they censored is when they told us, wait a minute, they took humanity and they said, we're forcing you to do this. Well, human nature is you're doing what? There's a group of people, majority of humanity, rebels, right? Because we're free spirits. We're free. We want to be free at least, right? We want to believe we're free, right? So when you see, when you saw that, you can't go into a restaurant unless you get vaccinated, then guess
Yep.
what I'm going to do? I'm going to go, well, I'm not going into a restaurant. I'm not getting
hmm
vaccinated.
That's
Even if
right.
your vaccine is good, I'm not doing it because you're forcing me to do it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a population that does that. So if they didn't do that and they were totally honest with the public, and by honesty is humility, right?
hmm
And I said that to someone at the NIH, by the way, who worked with Fauci, because she said to me, what we like in science is honesty. And I said to her, what I like in science is humility.
Yes.
Humility to know that we don't know shit. So, the bottom line is that's how humble we have to be.
Yeah.
We have to say, if they came to us with humility, okay, think about doctors like Dr. Peter Hotez. If
hmm
he came and said, look, maybe, maybe that's the answer. We don't know. This is a new virus that's mutating. We're going to try our best. This what we believe is the best way. Maybe people would have taken a different approach. They wouldn't have rebelled as much, right? Because then it's all in the approach, in the presentation. But unfortunately, forcing people just put a bunch of radars on. And I know a lot of people that just didn't take the vaccine just because of the radar was up
hmm
and asked questions, and the questions were not answered.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then you also had like De Blasio in New York eating a burger and fries, trying to entice people with food, and then it was a
Yeah,
lottery
the extreme.
for.
Yes.
Yeah, it was outrageous. So the number of things that they were doing that, oh, by the way, these things that we're giving you are going to make it so that you're actually sicker to begin with. And we're enticing you to go get a shot with that. But, it's hard too, because now that we're seeing the evidence come out, it sure seems to be that those that didn't get it in some cases are better off. I mean, it doesn't seem to be that every single shot was equally bad. And maybe it's because of the microbiome as well, because depending on how healthier.
Population that could have used it, right? Maybe
Sure.
the people that have zero bifidobacteria dying, if they
Yes.
were exposed to COVID, they didn't have access to drugs, ivermectin, Regeneron, all these drugs they didn't have access to. So maybe those people, those they were afraid of going to the hospital, maybe that population,
Mm-hmm.
might have been successful with the vaccine. But who knows? We
That's
never
right.
did the real studies, right? To kind
That's
of
the
look
hard
at
part.
the microbiome, looking at the people that got vaccinated and survived and didn't get COVID versus the people that were not vaccinated and survived and didn't get COVID, or the people that got COVID and, vaccinated versus non-vaccinated. So, I mean, there were so many good studies that could have been done, but
Yes.
the funds were not even allocated for studying the microbiome. I remember putting a protocol, a grant proposal in December of 2020 after I took care of one of the senators at the White House. I was under the radar with taking care of the White House at the time, of people in the White House. And my grant went on the desk of the head of the NIH. It didn't even get looked at. And all it was a grant of, hey, let's analyze the microbiome of people that have severe COVID versus people that are high risk exposed but never got COVID. What a
Yeah.
great idea that would have been, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't
100%.
sponsor it, but guess what? I sponsored it. I was like, well, I want to know. I want to know
Hmm.
for me first.
Yeah.
And then I did that study and I jumped. It was not easy. All that we did, from treating patients, from writing protocols on hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, to writing ivermectin, doxycycline, vitamin C, D, and zinc, to formulating vitamins in America, to testing the
Hmm.
vitamins on the microbiome, to testing hydroxychloroquine on the microbiome, to testing ivermectin on the microbiome, to testing the vaccines on the microbiome. None of it was easy. To testing vitamin C on the microbiome, to testing remdesivir on the microbiome, Regeneron on the microbiome. None of it was easy. And the worst part for me was really the retraction of the
Yeah.
data, retraction of a hypothesis, retraction of a treatment protocol that I gave like patients, a couple dozen patients that were hypoxic, just to showcase, hey, hypoxic patients live.
Yeah.
Now my patients are going to be having to wait for the documentary because all these patients are going to talk. I mean, I have pictures, I have documentation, I have charts. The FDA saw all that, right? And that's probably why I'm still doing research with the FDA watching me, right? They saw all that. They know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a hurricane and I stick to my points. But, the worst one for me was the recent retraction of the hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc effect on the heart.
Mm.
That when you at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were writing hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and still now in your electronic medical records, it basically will say, sorry, contraindicated, QT prolongation. So guess what? We did that study. We risked our lives, my life, my staff's life, to go to people's homes, put those halters on their heart, and monitor their EKG for 10 days, 24 hours a day. That data was collected, electronically to Infobionic, who basically had the data. We obviously, they would call me if there was a rhythm problem or anything. But the fact is, the QT prolongation, we didn't see it until we analyzed the data. And it was independent reviewers that looked at that data and said, yeah, there were no QT prolongation. So when we published that data and the reference number to the study is an ivermectin doxycycline study when we're talking about hydroxychloroquine, and that was not corrected in the journal. And they retract the paper because the reference was the wrong
Wow.
reference, which could have just been removed and
Wow.
said, you know what, this is the right reference. This is the study, right? But and that's at the peer review level, right? So why did you approve a study if you thought it was ivermectin I was giving when clearly in the paper it says hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak,
Yeah.
right? And so that was a trap, right? That was a trap to get these journals to basically say retract the paper. And there were so many traps that occurred in these publications to allow them to retract that none of them have anything to do with science or the proposal. Think about the
Right.
hypothesis of ivermectin. You know how they retracted that paper? Because I quoted in those papers that showed that ivermectin worked in COVID. And those papers were retracted. So they retracted the papers that showed ivermectin worked on COVID. Remember, I lost no one during the pandemic and I used
Yeah.
ivermectin like crazy.
Yep.
How is that legit? That what I'm supposed to have a magic ball that's going to tell me which paper is going to be retracted when I'm publishing my hypothesis. The hypothesis was the most read in the pandemic and it got retracted. Why? Because I quoted some papers later on were retracted. Well, guess what? Come back to me and say, Dr. Hazen, those papers are retracted. Do you want to correct your hypothesis so we can keep it published because it's a hypothesis and it's important? So, at the end of the day, what we care about in research is that validation occurs, and validation occurs by reproducibility of the data. When I
Yes.
published the severe COVID, the findings of loss of bifidobacteria in severe COVID versus high risk exposed, guess what? China did the study and reproduced the data. Italy did the study and reproduced the data. I'm sure they wanted to prove me wrong, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
great. Prove me wrong. I'd love to
Well,
know.
that's science. That's
That's
the idea.
fine. By the way, I'm the girl that loves to be shown wrong. I love
Sure.
it because then
Yeah.
I learn something.
Yeah.
Okay. Because if I'm always right, then I don't learn anything.
That's
So
right.
I love when people challenge me and say, you can't do this, because then it pushes me. It's like that kick that gives you the boost, right? My husband does that a lot. He's like, sure, sure, you're going to do this. And I'm like, thanks for the boost.
He
Watch me.
knows how to light your fire.
So my two words are like always watch me. So you know what? Watch me. I mean, prove me wrong. I want to see what I did wrong in order to learn from it, right? Because I went into this to learn and I went into this to fix diseases, to understand the microbiome. It doesn't, help me if I'm in the wrong path, right?
That's right. Well, what goes through my mind, there's a couple of things here. The one big question I have is what impact does light, both natural and artificial light, have on the microbiome? And then my question is, it makes sense that in the lab we're researching driven by disease and illness and such, but we also need to study the healthy. You think through COVID, we were seeing this ticker, this death toll, and increasing fear.
And
But
that's when we should have looked at the healthy. Yes.
100%, right? The
Yes.
number of people that were exposed that never got sick, or if they got sick, it was mild and they kept going. And that was my sense. It also, I guess my last question would be this dynamic of germ theory versus terrain theory. I've just so long, it resonates with me, terrain theory. I'm responsible for my body, what I put into it, how I take care of it. And I trust my microbiome and my immune system. So expose me to whatever you need to, I'll overcome it. And that's been the case. As I said, I didn't get the vaccine, but I did get exposed and it was very mild. Thank goodness.
So, yes, the terrain theory, I think it's somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
neither one nor the other. I think it's
Sure.
together. It's you have to come together. Maybe it's both, right? I think what we tend to look at with the microbiome is we tend to think it's one bug, one cause, and that's how narrow-minded some people are. You have to look at the whole thing. When I look at a patient, I don't just look at you know, what bug is in his microbiome, right? I look at what's his environment like. Does he have mold in the house? Is he eating something that's killing his microbiome, right? What is he eating? Is he exposed to plants that have viruses? And therefore, that's why I found a virus in his gut. Because you can get rid and fix the whole body, but then if the person is still in the environment, think about that fish in a dirty fish tank. You don't
Totally.
clean the fish tank. You could, keep giving shots to the fish, but the fish is in a dirty fish tank. Stop giving shots, clean the fish tank, right?
That's right.
So I think it's two part, right?
Hmm.
It's the part of the microbes have a role and certainly cause the disease. And then it's the second part of the terrain. What am I doing to enhance my immunity,
Yeah.
to toughen, to become more resilient? Am I putting a band aid every time I take a pill? You think about Parkinson's with dopamine, right?
Yep.
Am I taking dopamine and suppressing my ability to make my own dopamine? And therefore, am I ever going to get out of Parkinson's? Do I have any hope of regaining those microbes if I'm just feeding dopamine, right? Think about the guy with the digestive enzymes, right? But of course, by the way, I'm just going to say dopamine is the best we have right now for Parkinson's. So, of course, you're going to do that because studies are showing that if you do it, you delay the progression of Parkinson's, right? But when you're in the science realm and when you're innovating, you have to think outside the box. You have to think, what if dopamine is making the person just give it that band aid and never restore the microbiome, right?
Yeah.
The second thing that you have to look at is maybe dopamine needs something else to readjust the microbiome, right? So I think it's like when I was saying, like with digestive enzymes, right? If you make your body used to taking digestive enzymes or laxatives for that matter of fact, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Then your body's not going to work anymore to move your bowels because it's going to say, well, she's going to give me a laxative. Why do I need to move?
Totally.
I think it's two parts, and I think it's yes, the microbe, yes, the microbes, yes, the terrain, yes, all of it together. And I think we have to start thinking, more inclusive than just one thought process. Okay. And I
For
think
sure.
where we lose science is one scientist that's just stuck on his way. Like, during the pandemic, people were like stuck on just ivermectin. And then they realized, wait a minute, in some people you have to give hydroxychloroquine because they're
Hmm.
so far gone, and then in some people you have to add more stuff, and you learn through all that. So that's to answer the terrain question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the other one is the impact that light has on the microbiome.
Yeah.
Because, again, pulling from a lot of the quantum health type of thing, it resonates with me to think about where's our family from ancestrally speaking, and how can we give our body currently as close to that as we can, but then also considering where do I currently live? So am I eating local and seasonal to where I currently live? Because that's given my body the information that it needs from that environment as well. I think those things play
So
a big role.
so when you look at light is vitamin D, which is much needed. And vitamin D, we noticed it hasn't been published yet. It's increasing the bifidobacteria. I tend to always talk about my research before I publish it, but it
I
does
love it.
increase the bifidobacteria. Also, we've noticed that people do better in the summer than in the winter because they're outdoors, right? So
Sure.
there's less disease overall in the summer than in the winter because people are outdoors, right? So light is definitely important, but more than light is microbes, right? Microbes around us, the nature that are floating, that are breathing oxygen, etc. So I think that's very important. I think we're going to find out that light has benefits. We're certainly seeing red light, the benefits of red light. We're certainly seeing the blue light, when you have a room full of mold and bad microbes and you put a blue light, it tends to sterilize in a way. So we know light has a role. And what's amazing is how nobody's been able to reproduce the sunlight.
Right.
As much as we can try it with these artificial lights, they're not really what the sun gives us.
Yeah, they are not full spectrum.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think we're going to come to realize in the future is the power of quantum physics, the power of magnetic fields, the
Yeah,
power of pulsations, the power of music, the power of sounds in healing, right? Think
absolutely.
about that music that makes you feel good inside and like you're all happy. And then think about that other music that you just want to kill yourself, right?
Mm.
I would drive with my husband and he would always put this horrible music, which is like, hardcore. And I'm like, oh my God, this is not music to wake up in the morning to. This is
Right.
music I want to kill myself to. So, and I tend to be more, musical driven and classical music. It's peaceful. It gives you peace. It gives you sense of stability. So I think in the future, music is going to be driving healing. I think there's going to be a
Absolutely.
lot of, sound waves, frequencies that are going to be helping in the healing process. Nerves are just that, right? I mean, you think of like a frequency that touches a nerve and then you get that impulse. That's going to be the future, I think. And I think that's
I
going to be the
agree.
future for a lot of these neurological diseases that, yes, they have a microbiome dysbiosis underlying in some of them. Some of them, it's the connection between the brain and the gut. Some of them, it's the brain primary. But there's a lot of brain gut access and
Hmm.
there's a lot of microbiome dysbiosis with these diseases. But I think what we're going to come to find out is in order to treat these diseases properly, we need multiple avenues. And, I'm very big on multi specialty working on one disease. When I work Alzheimer's, for example, with Dr. Sheldon Jordan, Dr. Jordan does his thing. Then I work with Dr. Good now. He does his thing. And then I do my thing with the microbiome and we all come together and we look back and we say, maybe we should do this before the implant. Maybe we should do this after the implant. Maybe we'll get better results if we increase the frequency. So it really needs that work together. Working with my, I work with autism or a lot of kids with autism, and it's not always just microbiome. Sometimes it's stem cells, sometimes it's biologics, sometimes it's PRP, so there's so many avenues to treat, but we need to kind of put them all together in a protocol that says, okay, this is how I would do it for this particular kid. And it really becomes the art of medicine. It's
Yeah,
really
for sure.
having this canvas with all these tools that you can use and say, I'm going to use this tool, this color, and this color, and this color. And then you end up with a beautiful painting. So,
Absolutely right. No, that's beautiful. And I know I could go on for quite some time with you. You've got a lot of info, but I do know you have a limited time here. And
yes.
there you go. My red light shut off. That tells me our time is up. So for the people that want to work with you, I know you're doing the work out of the lab, but are you still treating patients as well? Is that kind of blended
Yeah, we
together? How's
treat
that work?
patients. Yeah, we treat patients. The testing is not cheap. So I just tell patients, this is research still. We advise everyone to go see as many doctors as possible. We're really the last person you want to see after you've seen everybody because we do cutting edge research. We do clinical trials, and whether it's clinical trials with pharma, whether it's clinical trials with nutraceutical companies, or whether it's clinical trials on the microbiome, this is what we do. We recommend for everybody that has a condition to put their names on our website, progenibiome.com, and to basically tell us their disease and their phone number and their email. So we put them on our database. And then when something comes along that's promising, then we call them, which is what I've done for years with clinical trials. And there's always things that come along, good things, good drugs, good nutraceuticals, good, natural products, good innovations, good stem cells. There's always something. And, I work with a lot of doctors, thousands of doctors on my biome squad. So we all work together. I have access to a lot of doctors. I work with the Amen Clinic, Dr. Amen and his team, Ebony Cornish. I work with Dr. Sheldon Jordan. I work with, so many doctors, Robin Rose, Elliot Danetz, et cetera, et cetera. So I think ultimately, it's about a collaboration. It's about all of us coming together. I think the beauty of the pandemic is it joined all of us as physicians. Molly James, Mary Bowen, Kat Lindley, Robert Malone, Pierre Corey, Peter McCullough, Paul Merrick, all these Brian Tyson, George Fareed, all these doctors collaborated together, became a one force. We
Yeah.
united together and we saved a lot of lives. And
Amen.
at the end of the day, we want to see the data and we want more than those people that were the brilliant minds of the pandemic, the brilliant soldiers of the pandemic. We want an army of doctors to join us. I spoke at the Philippines, brought doctors to my path. I spoke in Malaysia, brought doctors to my path. I spoke in Zimbabwe, got doctors to my path. I'm speaking in Indonesia, spoke in France, got doctors in my path. So little by little, I think the scientific community and the medical community is going to join forces to see the
Yeah.
microbiome and to see our research and to join us in doing the research to advance medicine and science really as unbiased as possible, right? I mean, so which brings me to my point of we need funding because none
Yeah.
of this is possible without funds. So we have a Microbiome Research Foundation that anybody could donate to. Half the time it gets hacked, so I recommend you just send checks to our offices so we
Mm,
can, because there's always nefarious people behind that. We
yes.
also have the biome boosters, which are basically vitamins that the full profit goes to, or the full proceeds goes to the foundation to pay for the research. We have a
Okay.
lot of work to do. We need to see what zinc does on the microbiome on its own. What does
Hmm.
B12 do to the microbiome on its own? What does B do? We've only tapped like a couple of things. We know vitamin C within 24 hours. We know vitamin D within 24 hours. We know ivermectin within 24 hours. We know bovine immunoglobulin, what it does within a week of using it, right? We know. So we've tapped a lot of different things, hydroxychloroquine. We've tapped a lot of different things that we have an idea what biologics are doing on the microbiome. But we need to see more. We need to see
Yeah.
what cumin does, turmeric does to the microbiome. What microbes does it impact? What microbes does it increase? This is what we need to see. So we need funding, Microbiome Research Foundation. That also helps us bring doctors to the movement, educate doctors. It supports the Malibu Microbiome Meeting, which is basically where Scott Jackson has been, who's the head of the National Institute of Standard in the microbiome space, has been speaking, and Lee Frame from GW, and so many doctors on the Biome Squad have been given a stage in this amazing meeting to really talk about people's innovation research and not something that's selling a product.
Yeah.
So, when you look at Dr. Sahil Khanna talking about chronic urinary tract infections and the fact that these chronic urinary tract infections are improved by fecal transplant, that's something we discussed at the meeting, and that was privy to a lot of the doctors that were there. So this is what we need funds for, and
Yeah.
it's difficult to get grants, and obviously, there's no product behind it, so nobody's really sponsoring this, and also it interferes with the price of a stock somewhere else. So
That's right.
sponsor this. But I think we need to be better. We need to do better for humanity. We need to come together. It's one thing to invest in pharmaceutical products and something that makes money, but maybe a small percentage needs to be given to like the goodness of humanity, to
For
help
sure.
get answers for autism, to help get answers for Parkinson's. It's a shame that papers are retracted because there's so much in my brain that I've learned from the microbiome that I can't even put on papers anymore. And I've kind of lost I don't know, my passion for publishing, So I'm like, well, I'll just know about it and I'll just treat my patients as they come.
For sure. I will say, I wonder, and I hate putting too much pressure in saying, oh, one person will make the difference, but I will say, I pray RFK Jr. can make some changes that'll allow that stuff to stay and get the corruption out. Because that's nothing but corruption, those papers being retracted for those fraudulent reasons. That's
Yeah,
outrageous.
and I got to tell you, the RICO Act is awesome. I'm very excited
Yeah.
about that.
Amen.
Well, because
Amen.
nobody has a sign. Listen, I could have spent my time suing people, right? Suing Bill
Yeah.
Gates for interference with my research, suing Zuckerberg for not publishing my ads to recruit patients, right? Suing the people that basically retracted my papers, right? Suing the journals. But then your life is just defined as hating
That's
and
right.
hitting and going after people, right? I'd rather make my life be meaningful and build and continue building rather than focusing on hate and focusing on destruction. I'd rather focus on building, right?
God
Now,
bless.
obviously, if they put me against a wall at some point, you know, I'm going
That's
to
right.
punch back.
There's a
But,
time to fight back. Exactly right. But fighting
and
back, yeah. I mean, you're not dropping to their level. You're rising above. You're doing it with the faith of God, and I'm
that's
with
it.
you. I will
That's,
pray this can help support, and I'll play my role, and hopefully we can get it continue to move forward.
well, thank you. And thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And audience, you know the drill. If you haven't already, subscribe, like, comment, share, all that good stuff. And I will be sure to put all the contact info for Dr. Hazan in the show notes. And until next time, be well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey.